Welcome back to Journey to Joy Live. I'm your host, Dr. Enjoy, and this is week 20, episode 20 of Journey to Joy Live. So, thank you for those who have watched every episode of Journey to Joy, and it has been quite the journey. So, last week I had the wonderful Dr. Carla Booker, and we spoke about her book. We got into grief talk. Her book, 71 Days How to Say Goodbye When Death Says Hello. As we get into the holidays, grief, loss, trauma tends to pop up, right? So when we think about spending time with family and spending time for the holidays, a lot of times things from our past just decides to come up. And that's why I called it Ghost from the Past, because our trauma, our previous whatever that's happened to us tends to haunt us. And so, what I'd like to talk about today is how can we get past those hauntings? How can we get past the ghosts from our past, those traumas? And it looks different for everybody. But of course, what I'm going to speak about are some general strategies. But first, what is trauma? What is it? It's when something devastating, something distressing, something life threatening happens to you emotionally, verbally, physically, anything. It could be a natural disaster, right? Losing your house, a fire, a break in, a car accident, gun violence, watching someone die, learning of someone dying, neglect, abuse, abandonment. Trauma can look like anything. And of course, abuse can be verbal abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And you can experience a trauma, you can experience one type, you can experience multiple types throughout childhood, throughout adulthood, whatever. So, trauma can be for sure an obstacle to joy. So, one might ask, is it possible for me to experience joy if I've had trauma? Yes, it is possible. Making that choice to get on that journey to joy despite trauma, that's the choice that we all must make. And that choice is getting help and seeking help and processing the trauma. Once I want to face the trauma and once I want to process it, will it make things worse? That's what some people ask. I've mentioned this before. As soon as you start talking about that trauma or talking about your past or talking about what you need to process, emotions do pop out because you're thinking about it, you're talking about it, you're writing about it. So it does tend to come out, the emotions. And it may feel like it's getting worse and it may make you feel like, well, you know what? I just can't do this. I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm never going to do this. I'll just suppress it. And if you suppress it, it could come out as a physical symptom and still make things worse. So suppressing it does not help. That can make you your post-traumatic stress get worse if you have that, or your depression worse, or your anxiety worse. So it's always good to bring it out and face it. And the therapist is there to help you be able to deal with those emotions as they pop out when you are facing and processing your trauma. So it does start out very hard, but the more you process it, the more you will learn how to cope and deal with those emotions when you talk about it. And then the less the trauma will haunt you. So there is healing from trauma. It is possible to heal when facing trauma. Trauma, or the effects of trauma, obviously it affects our mental health. I mentioned PTSD, I mentioned depression, I mentioned anxiety. And I mentioned in the past how trauma affects our nervous systems, and it kicks you into fight or flight mode. It kicks you into anxious mode, panic mode, and puts you in when you're in certain situations where there's not really a threat, you might feel that threat because a trauma has affected you in that way. So there could be a trigger in that environment that reminds you of the trauma and you can't stop thinking about it. So I think number one is, first off, really understanding in recognizing your own personal trauma, understanding that, you know what, I went through this. I have past traumas. So that's the first thing, is recognizing it. And then, of course, recognizing your triggers. What is the trigger? Why am I feeling anxious all of a sudden? Why am I feeling so startled, or my heart rate is up, or I'm in panic mode, I'm in a panic attack? Sometimes people get panic attacks and there's no real trigger and they're not even sure what's going on. And when the symptoms come to the point where you're not able to take care of yourself, you're not able to go to work, you're not able to go to school, you're not able to take care of your kids, or relationships are disrupted, then that is a sign too that help is needed. And help is beneficial, even if it starts out with feeling like this is making things worse. But the symptoms come out first. It feels worse at first, but then it gets better. So recognizing yourself, recognizing I have trauma that I need to face. Sometimes a part of that healing journey is forgiving whoever impacted you in that trauma, whatever the trauma was. Forgiveness isn't for that person, it's for you. Because a lot of times, if we've had trauma from our past or current trauma, we're blaming the other person. We're blaming ourselves. We blame somebody. We're feeling guilty. It's this heavy weight of unforgiveness on us, and that affects us every day. And that can come out as anger, it can come out as sadness, it can come out as fear, worry, overthinking, a lot of different things. Grief. Grief is definitely can lead to a type of trauma. You can have traumatic grief depending on how that person died, or if you watched them die, or how you learned of how they died. It can be sort of traumatic. I know for me, the way I learned of my father dying, I wasn't there. But since I wasn't there, I kind of picture and replay when I heard about him dying, and I picture how he may have looked, even though I didn't see him, and I picture the seconds before he died, what he could have been going through. And so it's not really a flashback, but it's like these images in my head that I replay of, like, he must have been so fearful and so scared. There had to have been a point during that time, those seconds before he died, that he knew this is it and I'm about to die. And that, to me, I replay and I'm just like, oh my God, that's the worst feeling ever. And so I feel like, did he suffer? Was he in pain? I have all these questions. And so I'm not saying that characterizes traumatic grief, but I'm just sharing my personal experience with the closest person to me that died, that this is what I go through. But it's important to be able to try to process that. It's okay to ask certain questions about the trauma or the traumatic grief. I know the way I deal with my father's death is I carry around, especially around November, because he died a few days before Thanksgiving, I carry around a hammer because he's a handyman. The last thing he told me to get was a new hammer, because apparently my hammer was too dainty for him. So he said, go get a new hammer. And I hadn't gotten it. So after he died, I said, okay, I'm going to get a hammer. I'm going to put you in the hammer. So yes, this is an urn. And I'm carrying my dad around my neck for the month of November, because that's what makes me feel better. So I digress. We're talking about trauma in general, but that kind of hits into a little bit of traumatic grief as well. So, I mean, understanding that you may have experienced a trauma and that it can impact who you are, it can impact your mental health, and setting on a journey towards wellness, a journey towards joy is super important, because living in the past and consistently allowing the trauma to affect your present, it's no way to live. We've got to be present and we've got to get to the future. And that is starting with making a choice of, you know what, I'm going to enter this journey to joy, and I'm not going to let this past get to me. I'm not going to let this trauma continue to hold me. So it's important, and be strong about it. But then you're thinking, okay, I want to get down. I want to get rid of this trauma. How do I do that? I want to get rid of the way I feel about it. I want to start on the path towards healing. What do I do? So just because you entered into that journey doesn't mean you're automatically healed. It doesn't mean you automatically know what to do. First things first, seek help. Therapy, counseling, A lot of people's jobs have the employee assistance program where you can get free counseling or free therapy. So that's good. That's a start. But being able to talk to a mental health professional about your trauma in therapy, that's where the healing process is. And it's not just about talking about it. I mean, some people, all they need to do is just simply talk about it and that's it. They do just fine. But a therapist who's very good at cognitive behavioral therapy, I talk about that a lot, CBT, that uh, helps us tie in our thoughts or understand that our thoughts are tied in with our emotions and our behaviors. So being able to reframe your mind, your thoughts, your beliefs, and lead from negative thoughts to positive thoughts is really important. Oh, I'm sorry. I was on another page. I have a comment. I would love to know where you purchased the necklace. Thank you. I got the necklace from Etsy, actually. Etsy. So there's a lot of things I get off of Etsy. It's really cool. So anyhow, I'll put that on the comment as well. Thanks for asking. So I was explaining CBT. That is the number one gold standard for treatment for PTSD and for trauma. In fact, it's called trauma focused CBT. So it's TFCBT. And there's other types of therapy for people who've experienced trauma. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. It has to do with eye movements. I've never did it myself. I'm not certified, but it has to do with something about eye movements and being able to process your trauma. That is definitely what I hear is helpful. But like I said, I haven't done it myself as far as with patients. Mindfulness meditation, I talk about that a lot, right? Being present. Mindfulness helps us be present in the moment. If we're present, we're not thinking about our past. If we're present, we're not thinking about our future and overthinking what we need to be doing or allowing the trauma to get in the way. Thinking about the now. Practicing mindfulness to stay grounded in the present moment, so important. And that helps you have attention, that helps you have concentration, because when you're depressed or you have PTSD or anxiety, that definitely reduces concentration. And that's all you can think of is the trauma, the past, and anxiety. So mindfulness and meditation is extremely important on your journey to joy and facing the trauma as an obstacle. Self-compassion. So if we're feeling guilty and blaming ourselves for what has happened, then it's definitely an obstacle to our joy. We're in our own way. So get out of your own way. It's not your fault. It is not your fault. And that's a positive affirmation for you to say, it is not my fault. And I am worthy. I have self-respect. I deserve respect from others. Saying those things, it helps. Being compassionate about yourself, treating yourself with the same kindness that you'd offer somebody else. Why don't you deserve that? Challenging self-talk, challenging negative self-talk, and replacing it with positive affirmations. I talk about positive affirmations all the time. Why? Because on your journey to joy, you need to be positive about yourself. How can you do this without being positive? Super important on our journey to joy. So challenge yourself when you come up with something negative, like, oh, it's my fault, or I shouldn't be here. I've had so much trauma. Why me? And those are definitely very common questions to ask. But going to therapy and dealing with it and having your positive affirmations, compassion for yourself is definitely helpful. And establishing healthy boundaries. Identify and communicate what kind of personal boundaries can help you or what do you need. Saying no. I talk about that a lot. Saying no when it's necessary and not spreading yourself too thin. Because it's when we get so stressed out about something that's going on that the past trauma, whatever stressor comes about and weighs in on us. I know that's what happens to me. When I get more stressed or anxious, I start to think about my father. And I'm like, well, why am I thinking about him now? Because now I'm going to feel worse because now I'm grieving when I'm stressed out about something else. I don't know. But I've noticed that though, when I get more stressed about something else, then I start to grieve. So recognizing those signs and getting ahead of it and having the positive self talk, mindfulness, meditation, self care, me time, all those things are very helpful. Physical exercise, engaging in regular physical exercise to release built up tension and stress. I say that all the time. Anxiety definitely can be tackled by physical exercise, especially if your body is able to exercise. Some people can't do certain exercises. So know your body and know what you can do, but set a sustainable routine for yourself that you can do every day or every other day, but consistently. Arts and creativity can be helpful. A lot of people, when they go into therapy, they do play therapy, even as adults. I know for a lot of children, of course, we do play therapy because talking about something and trying to figure out what's going on is difficult for kids to talk about. So play therapy is something for kids, but adults can do it as well. Some adult patients that I have say that they love to paint, they love art. It makes them feel so much better, or create creative projects, writing poetry, listening to music, dancing. I love Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer is like up there with running, because running is my therapy, and I feel like Hans Zimmer is my therapy. I turn that on. He's a conductor of music for most soundtracks, or a lot of soundtracks that I listen to. Sounds amazing and just makes me feel so calm and at ease. So, a lot of the strategies that I talk about on every other journey to joy can also help with dealing with trauma. The only difference is that with trauma, I definitely recommend seeing someone to help coach you through this journey. Connecting with supportive communities, finding different groups that may help with specific types of trauma. For traumatic grief, there's Kate's Club. I know that that's for kids up to teenagers. But anyway, that's in Georgia. If you're watching it, and you're not in Georgia, but anyhow, Kate's Club is in Atlanta, so they have groups and field trips and camps for kids who are facing traumatic grief, or just grief in general. Maybe it wasn't to the point of traumatic, but it's definitely helpful. So there's a lot of different groups out there that you can find to connect with supportive communities. As far as a church, your spirituality, it's important to use that as well as a supportive community that can be helpful. Mind body techniques. Yoga is really good for that. Tai Chi, that can be helpful. It helps you put your mind at ease. Taekwondo, hey, you learn definitely some positive energy going there and some discipline. That's very important. And just simply educating yourself. What is post-traumatic stress disorder? What is trauma? How can it impact me? What do I need to do to make it better? And just knowing the signs, the physical signs of your body, like, okay, my heart's starting to race. I'm starting to have trouble breathing, and noticing that in the beginning so that you can be able to calm yourself down with deep breathing techniques or whatever your coping skills are in the moment, and celebrating that progress. Sometimes it's not a linear progression. Sometimes something makes you go back and backtrack, and that traumatic response happens again, and you feel like, oh, I thought I got beyond this. It's okay. It's okay. You've made it through to that point, and you've made some progress. Celebrate it, and even though there may be some lapses where some symptoms come out, that's all right. You will still be moving forward and be able to get beyond that trauma and be able to find joy. So I wish I had questions, because I would love to answer some questions. Let's see if I can find some common questions that people might ask. How do I recognize if past traumas are affecting my present well-being? Well, like with anything else, if you're not able to sustain normal activity, your usual daily living, getting to work, sleep, eating properly, your routine of exercise, your hobbies, you're not interested anymore, and you find that you're thinking about that trauma a lot more, you can notice that that must be affecting my present well-being. It must be affecting how I'm doing now. It must be a trigger. So that's one way of noticing, or a lot of ways of noticing, is that I'm not myself lately. What's going on? I'm finding myself thinking about it. And sometimes you don't even realize you're thinking about it. But it's good to be able to start to examine for yourself, or be like your own investigator and think, why am I feeling like this all of a sudden? Is it this? Is it because I got that yesterday? Is it this news? Or is it because of what happened to me? So it's good to think through. And that's why it's good for us to journal every day, or journal every other day, or once a week, however often. Journal so that you can look at your mind. Journaling is a window to your mind, being able to recognize what is affecting you. Can revisiting past traumas be helpful or harmful? So, like I said before, it can start out feeling harmful because your symptoms are getting worse. Like you feel more depressed because you're talking about it initially. You feel more anxious because you're talking about it initially, but overall, it's helpful. And that may not be everybody. Maybe as soon as someone talks about it, they feel better right away. But for some people, it can feel harmful at first, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep talking about it and trying to process it. Thinking through it and processing it and getting on the other side where joy is, it's definitely worth it. Let's see, how does trauma impact our relationships and how can we navigate that? Trauma can impact relationships. If you're feeling anxious or angry or guilty or depressed because of your trauma, that's all you're thinking about, it can affect relationships because you're irritable and you're not getting along with that person, whether it's your spouse or your siblings or at work. It can make you have outbursts or withdraw and not talk or shut down. If you're shutting down, it is affecting relationships, right? So definitely can affect. But being open with that person, if you trust them, that can be helpful of how you navigate that. Like, you know what? I'm just going through something. It's November. It's the month my dad died. And you know what? I've been thinking about him a lot. So forgive me if I'm a little bit more irritable than usual. And if you need to go see someone, go see someone. Let's see what other common questions we have. Are there specific therapeutic approaches that are effective in trauma recovery? So I did mention TFCBT, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That's actually an abbreviated program, meaning it's not ongoing 10 years of therapy. TFCBT is a course of 12 weeks, and there's 3 different segments. It starts out with psychoeducation, basically educating you and making you aware of your body, your symptoms, trauma, and how it can affect you. And then there's a phase where you start to basically build up coping skills, because as you get into the trauma stories, like I said, symptoms are going to come out. So being able to build up the coping skills of how to cope with or deal with those emotions that come out when you start to talk about it, that's important. So that's actually built into trauma focused CBT, where you learn, okay, I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 right now. Let's see what I wrote. So when I'm feeling an 8, I'm going to go do the run, and that's going to help me. You establish those things before you get into it. And then the other part of TFCBT is writing the narrative. Writing, basically like writing a book or journaling, however you want to word it. What happened? What happened to you? And writing it down in detail. So you're really getting into it. Do you remember what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what it tasted like, what it smelled like, whatever, right? The 5 senses of the trauma. So really actually details of it. That's important. It sounds scary. Nobody really wants to talk about the details of their trauma, but that therapist is there for you to walk you through that journey. How can one strike a balance between acknowledging past traumas and focusing on the present? That can be hard. And that actually can be hard in therapy in general, because a lot of people go into therapy with past traumas And then they have a lot of stressors going on right now. So it's like they're focused on working on what's happening now, and they never actually get into processing the previous trauma because there's a lot going on now. What I usually suggest is if you can see the therapist twice a week, you can talk about the present stuff one of those days of the week, and then the other day of the week you can process the previous trauma, so that way you're still going through all that. Because if you're actually in an endless battle of a current stressor, but there's still some deep-seated traumas you have to talk about, you'll never get to it if you continue to focus on the present, which is obviously something you do need to work on. So that's why I say try to do twice a week if you can. I know that can be hard. But that's one way of striking that balance of acknowledging it. And then thinking about what's affecting me now. Is it the past trauma that's mainly affecting me, or is it what's going on right now? But and then if there isn't anything going on right now, striking that balance of acknowledging the trauma and focusing on the present, that goes all the way back to the mindfulness and being grounded and focusing on the present and not the past. But if the past is affecting you, that is something that we should work on. Is it possible to find joy and peace after experiencing severe trauma? It doesn't feel like it's possible, but yes, it is definitely possible to find joy and peace after experiencing severe trauma. And that goes back to everything I've been talking about. Some works for some people, and then some works for you, some works for others, but definitely that mindfulness, therapy, counseling, talking about it, journaling, all those self-care techniques, all those things that I've been talking about to find joy can be helpful in helping you deal with your trauma. So we're going to first acknowledge it. I have trauma. And then number two, it's affecting me. Number three, what am I going to do about it? I choose joy. And by choosing joy, I'm going to go see a therapist. Thank you all for listening tonight. Have a good week. Happy Thanksgiving. I don't know if I'm going to be live on Thanksgiving Day because that's next Thursday. Or if I'm going to do a pre-recorded, but you'll find out and I'll let you know. Being intentional does help, and making a decision to choose joy. Thank you so much for watching and for making comments. I like having comments. And I don't know if you caught my answer. I bought the necklace from Etsy. I'll find the link to give you. Appreciate you for watching. Bye-bye.